Hey everybody, Plushie here, and I apologize for the wait. I did re-record quite a big portion of this video, just so that my voice sounds a little bit more consistent throughout the entire video. But yeah, today we're finally going to talk about Kazuradrop, which is the latest addition into the Sakura series family. And following this year's SSR's track records, she is yet another extremely interesting servant in terms of gameplay design, so I'm very excited to get into how she functions and whether I feel like she is worth your same quartz. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Kazuradrop. So looking at her base stats, she is just pretty standard as an alter ego, just like most servants. The real sauce lies within their skill set, passive, and MP. Her base gain is actually quite decent on the arts card. 0.68% per hit on a 3-hit arts card is really nice. On a 4-hit quick card, a lot less impressive, but it's actually still fine after we look at her skills. She has QQAAB deck, which I definitely still would have preferred double buster because she is quite crit centric after looking at some of her skills, but her arts card base gain once again is pretty nice, so I also will accept this deck. And she's also lawful good, just like most other Sakura faces, so it's very good and easy to bond up with the Gordolf CE, and she shares most of the other traits that the Sakura series share, including Sakura series itself as a new trait added to the game, or at least finally being relevant to the game because of Kazuradrop herself, so we'll get into that in just a bit. Kazudrop's first skill drains all enemies' MP gauge by 1, and it also increases her own debuff success rate by 30% for 3 turns. And Kazudrop applies debuffs for 3 turns, but it's not like the usual 3-turn debuffs. Instead, when you activate the skill, she activates all of her debuffs for a single turn, and on the following 2 turns at the start of the turns, she activates them again. So there are 1-turn duration debuffs, but she will reapply them at the start of each turn for 3 turns. So in a normal boss fight scenario, this essentially acts as a 3-turn debuff, just like most other debuff effects. It does play a little bit better into bosses with like on-break debuff cleanse effects, but usually it's just like a normal 3-turn debuff. But in farming, this actually allows this debuff effect to be carried across 3 different waves. So she's a lot better at being a support DPS hybrid in farming because of this reason. Well, now let's actually look at what debuffs she has. So first of all, she has a 50% quick down on all enemies, which essentially act as a party-wide 50% quick up, which is really strong. She also applies a 50% critical damage resist down, but instead of being just a debuff version of a critical damage up, it's actually a card type resist down. So instead of checking whether a specific card type is attacking the enemy and to decide whether this effect applies, it checks whether you crit the enemy. So for example, if the enemy has this debuff and I crit them with a buster card, the debuff would act as a 50% buster down. And it works the same if I crit them with a quick card, it will instead act as a 50% quick down, and if I crit them with an arts card, it will act as instead a 50% arts down. So this is obviously very interesting, and due to various different damage calculation reasons, usually you don't want to overload on the critical damage bracket. Like there are 3 separate damage brackets in terms of calculations. If you want more information, I can explain it in detail in the description. I've talked about this in other videos, so some people might already be aware. But also, more importantly, this actually increases star generation as well as MP gain because it is a card resist down. So if you crit the enemy while this debuff is in effect with a arts or a quick card, they would actually give you more MP gain. And if you crit them with a quick or a buster card, they will give you more star generation. So this is actually a very powerful effect, and this is also why I said Kazudrop's card gains are actually a lot better than they initially seem, because she obviously can crit them with her arts card and have essentially a 50% arts up, which is of course once again really good for her. And this overall is really good as well since it's a debuff. You can also use Kazuradrop as a very effective support for quick servants, especially because quick servants makes a lot of stars and they want to crit with all of their cards with those created stars. So all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So it's a really powerful skill. I know I yapped a bunch, but there is a lot to explain in terms of how this skill functions. And this skill alone is kind of, shaking Scotty's position as a quick meta support. Obviously, she, spoiler alert, doesn't have a targetable battery, so for farming, she's usually not going to be a pure support. But in terms of challenge quests, a lot of quick servants actually would prefer this type of effect, the triple card effectiveness down as long as you crit effect, instead of just a 100% quick crit up, because obviously getting more MP gain helps your single target quick servants spam their MP more easily in a boss fight. So this skill alone makes Kazuradrop very, very powerful as a pure support, and she has even more supportive effects down the line. Kazudrop's second skill is a 50 MP battery, and it also reduces all of her cooldown by 1 turn. However, if there are any other Sakura series servants on the field, she gets 50 extra charge from this effect per Sakura series servant. And because it says on field, it also counts the enemy field. But there is a trade-off. If there are any Sakura series servants on the field except for herself, even if it's another Kazuradrop, she loses the cooldown reduction effect. So this is all on a 6-turn cooldown as well. At a baseline level, if you don't have any other Sakura series on the field, this is a pretty strong effect skill. 50% battery, and it reduces all of her cooldowns by 1. So effectively, it will make her first skill also 5-turn cooldown, and this skill also 5-turn cooldown. So it's already strong in a vacuum. But this can also act as a 100 MP battery effect, or even more if there are just a single Sakura series servant on the field. Now, Sakura series is not all Sakura servants. Sakura series is specifically referring to the Sakura 5 as well as BB. So this does not work against servants such as Kama or Durga, unfortunately. But this does allow her to run double Kazuradrop in a special farming team, which we'll get into a bit later, because as long as you have another Sakura face on the field, she gets 100 battery from this, which is of course very, very powerful. The drawback does kind of sting sometimes with the lack of an extra cooldown reduction. If you are specifically running teams that rely on the combination of cooldown reducers and append 5s, you might have to redo your calculations for this, but overall this is a very flexible skill, and depending on your team building, you can get 2 different very powerful effects. Like 100 battery is strong, and so is 50 battery and cooldown reduction by 1. So it really depends on what you want. It does suck a little bit if you want to use her as a pure support for another Sakura series servant. This will mean that her supportive skills will come online a little bit longer compared to if you're supporting a non-Sakura series servant, but usually that's not that big of a deal, and just overall really powerful skill as well. Kazudrop's third skill is a full self debuff cleanse as well as a 5000 self heal. It also casts a 50% defense down for 3 turns on 1 enemy target. And finally, the skill also changes her class to whoever she targets this skill with for 3 turns, except for special cases where if the enemy is a shielder or a beast, then this would fail. But also, her class score will always follow alter ego instead of whatever class she currently is. And all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So even without the class change, this is a decent skill. Like full self debuff cleanse and 5000 heal makes her a really good challenge quest DPS, and the 3-turn 50% defense down is absolutely huge as a support, especially against one boss, and when combined with her first skill, makes her a really, really good pure support. But the most interesting effect of this skill is probably the class change, and even without any added context, this class change already eliminates the biggest issue with alter egos, which is of course their inability to deal with knight classes. There are many ways to lock out an alter ego DPS from being effective, just mix a couple of knight classes within. However, with this skill, at the very least, Kazuradrop is doing neutral damage. So Kazuradrop is also the first ever Omni DPS in the entire game where you cannot counterclass her on a defensive level, which is of course really cool. But we also have to talk about this effect with one added context, which is of course her very unique passive, Repulsion for One's Kin, which allows Kazuradrop to do 75% extra damage against any enemy that shares the same class as she does. Now, this extra damage is in the form of a power mod, which is the same type of buff as event bonus damages, as well as anti-traits that also affects card damage and not just tied to the MP. So it's not going to be as effective as just simply multiplying your damage by 1.75, but on average, especially in farming, this usually makes her damage about the same as a Berserker, which is of course times 1.5 against enemies that share the same class as she does. And assuming most farming quests have the same class across 3 different waves, Kazuradrop is literally a better Berserker in terms of her class, because she cannot be countered by foreigners. In fact, she is especially good at dealing with foreigners because foreigners already do double damage to other foreigners, but also she does on top of that a 75% extra damage from that passive. So she is extremely safe to pull for a new player especially, so you never have to worry about whatever class the enemy is. She will not get countered defensively in terms of class advantage. So again, extremely broken skill that allows Kazuradrop to be an Omni DPS that is at the very least doing like Berserker damage on average. This is a concept that has never been in FGO, and they finally opened the floodgates for this type of thing to exist. So I'm very fearful as to what in the future can show up in this game. So of course, we already looked at her most important passive, but she has a couple of other ones. She has Magic Resistance A, which increases her own debuff resistance by 20%, which is really nice. And she also has Territory Creation EX, which increases her arts performance by 12%. So combine that with the really nice base arts gain, as well as her first skill. Whenever she crits with her arts cards, she's gonna be getting massive amounts of MP. And of course, Repulsion for One's Kin, we just went over it. It also boosts her own damage by 30% against Sakura series enemies. So we already mentioned what Sakura series means. It's not just every Sakura servant, but it's specifically Sakura 5 plus BB. So if you are fighting against another Sakura 5, you're doing 105% extra damage to them just from this one passive. Kazuradrop's MP is a 4-hit AoE quick MP that reduces all enemies' attack by 20% for 3 turns, has a 40% chance to stun all of them for a single turn, and its overcharge effect is a 3-turn defense down that applies after damage that scales from 20% all the way up to 40%. A lot more tame compared to the insane skill set we just went through, but still a really solid MP. The combination of 20% attack down and defense down that stacks them in a boss fight does mean that if you get to spam her MP, the enemy gets crippled pretty decently. And also the 40% chance to stun does get boosted by her first skill, which of course gets up to a whopping 70% for 3 turns while her first skill is active. So it's also a semi-reliable crowd control effect compared to 40%, which is really shaky. I really wouldn't bet on it at all. And of course, the MP itself doesn't refund very well at all. It's a 4-hit quick MP with not very high base gain per hit for a quick servant anyways. But once again, her main strength lies in her extremely powerful skill set, and this is just a nice bonus. Also, if you're using Kazuradrop as a support, both the attack down and the defense down are still really useful as well for the entire party. So this truly, embodies her role as a semi-DPS/support. In terms of farming, if you want to use Kazuradrop as a standard triple Scotty single core looper, forget about it. Her refund is way too poor in order for that to feel worth it, but don't worry, she actually fits into a better team than a standard triple Scotty quick looping team, which is of course the double Kazuradrop system. The basic concept behind this team is, of course, having both Kazuradrops allow both Kazuradrops to have 100 battery from their skill 2 instead of just 50, because they count each other as a Sakura series member. And there are two main versions of this team. The first version involves Plug Suit, and the second version involves the Atlas Academy Mystic Code. So the first version is better for higher HP nodes like 90++, where you simply run double Kazuradrop and double Scotty. Now, if you don't have a second Scotty, you can sub her out for an Oberon, which is just going to be the same case for other farmings, where you have less damage for the first two waves, so way better burst damage for the final wave if you run Oberon. So essentially, the main concept of this team is you use one of your Scotties and your plug-in Scotty to charge one of your main Kazuradrops to 100 MP, as well as buff them with both Scotty buffs. And then you also use both Kazuradrops for skill, which will give a total of 100% quick down for this turn as well as the following two turns. So if we look at the main Kazuradrop in the party, she has a total of 100% quick up plus 15% from Summer Scotty's skill 2, as well as 100% quick down. So they have a total of 215% quick up, essentially. And that is not actually less steroids than if you were just to use triple Scotty. So this team basically allows your main DPS to feel like they are a single core looper while not being an actual single core looping team. Instead, you use the other Kazuradrop, who only has 100% quick down to work with, but it's still quite a bit, to be honest. It's the equivalent of having double Scotty to clear the lowest HP wave in the 3-turn farmings. Sometimes it's wave 1, sometimes it's wave 2, depends on the situation, and you use your main Kazuradrop first time with double Scotty's battery, and the second time with her own 100 battery to clear 2 stronger waves. And this team is really, really good. It also doesn't care about enemy count. It is brute force charging both Kazuradrops to allow them to MP 3 times in total. So it's almost like a Buster looping team, but you can also run Black Grail on your main DPS. So it is very, very strong. You also, of course, get the final boost with the Mystic Code as well. And once again, you can sub out one of your Scotties for Oberon, and Oberon would actually help your other Kazuradrop that isn't the main DPS have a little bit more damage, because Oberon has another party-wide 30% MP damage up. So it really depends on what you're farming and how much damage you actually need. So this is really, really strong. The other version of this team is, of course, the Atlas Academy Mystic Code cooldown reduction version, which instead of having 2 Scotties help your Kazuradrop charge her battery to 100 for the first time, you're just trying to use her battery twice, right? And the benefit of this is, of course, first, you don't have to run Plug Suit. You have a full, clean backline to bond up your servants with. And second of all, you're actually not losing that much steroids, because you can also double cast your Kazuradrop's skill 1, which is another 50% quick up or quick down, basically the same thing in farming. Now, of course, you have the choice to run Koyanskaya of Light, because Koyanskaya of Light is cooldown -2, Atlas is another 2, and then if you have natural progression of turns for 2 more turns, then your cooldown would come back. But it is actually more advised to have your Kazuradrop, at least one of them, your main Kazuradrops, a Pen 5 unlocked and leveled up to level 6, because you want to double cast both her skill 1 and skill 2. And with that, of course, you can still run Koyan Light, but if you you do run Koyan Light with that kind of comp, you can double cast Kazurdrop's skill 1 by turn 2. So you have essentially 100% quick down for the first turn and 150% quick down for the following 2 turns. So you get better damage on wave 2 if you run Koyan Light. But if you want higher burst damage, you can instead run Geronimo. Yeah, you probably didn't expect to hear his name in any farming comp, but Geronimo is actually the second, or actually the best choice, depending on the situation, for this double Kazurdrop Atlas Academy Mystic Code setup, because Geronimo's buffed skill 3 actually allows him to target your main Kazurdrop with a 50% quick up for a single turn, and also a cooldown reduction by 1 turn. So you can get a total of 150% quick down and 50% quick up. So essentially 200% quick up by turn 3. So, you know, the Geronimo version allows you to do the most burst damage. Obviously, you can also use other cooldown reduction by 1 units, such as Summer Suzuka, if you have Kazurdrop in her second ascension, which are Summer Ascensions, or you can use someone like Takasugi if you want both Kazurdrops to get a little bit of a quick buff. But Geronimo is the cheapest version of this team, and it's also really nice to see how easy it is to form a coherent farming team for a newer player who aren't necessarily going for 90++, because this team, truthfully, does kind of lack damage in 90++ in most cases. However, if you're like a new player and you're a big fan of Kazurdrop, you have her at like MP2 or 3, all you need is just to max her append skills, which you can get the materials from by using Pure Prisms, and also having Atlas Academy Mystic Code, which is just completely free since you joined the game, and Geronimo is also very easy to get, so you don't even have to max his third skill, because you know, you just need the cooldown reduction by 1, and 48% quick up is basically the same as 50% anyways. So yeah, it's technically one of the cheapest farming teams that is very useful up until like 90+ even, depending on your investment in your Kazurdrop. And yeah, it's very, very cool for players on a budget or players that are extremely new and doesn't have all the meta supports. And of course, I cannot forget to mention the fact that Kazurdrop has this whole class change gimmick, and considering the fact that most 90++s aren't mixed classes, you are at the very least a Berserker or better whenever you're farming with Kazurdrop. So once again, that Omni class DPS role comes into play very heavily in a farming context. And finally, at the end of the farming section, I want to ask a bit of a nuanced question. Do you want to change your class when you farm? Now, obviously, if you're against night classes, you are forced to transform. If you are against extra classes, you are also better off just to transform, since if you're doing neutral either way, doing neutral with 75% extra damage from your passive is, of course, a better idea. And if you transform into a foreigner, then you're also still doing double damage, because foreigners do double damage against foreigners. So those two are not the issues. The issue arises when you are fighting against either cavalries or specifically berserkers, because you're essentially choosing between whether you want to do 1.5 times class advantage damage or 75% extra damage from her passive from the same class repulsion thing. Now, if you are against cavalries, and if you are not equipped with a Black Grail, it is actually a better idea to turn your class into the same as the enemy, doing neutral damage but also taking the 75% extra damage from your passive. And it's quite easy to understand because there are no other buff types that are in the same bracket as a power mod, so the calculation for your final damage would actually be your damage multiplied by 1.75, which would just be better than multiplying by 1.5. However, this changes if your Kazurdrop is equipped with a Black Grail, or if you're using someone like Oberon, who has a lot of MP damage ups because he's doubling his skill 1's effect at the very least, and also you include the Mystic Code. So in that case, it's actually better to not change your class and take the 1.5 times class advantage instead of the 75% passive damage boost, because once again, power mod is in the same bracket of MP damage up, so during the final damage calculation, they would be additive instead of multiplicative, which will water down each other's effect. However, if you are fighting against a Berserker, it is always better to transform or change your class into a Berserker as well, because even though you are reducing your class advantage damage from 2.0 to 1.5, it is not nearly as big as a jump compared to jumping from 1.0 to 1.5, so the 75% extra damage from the passive would still prevail in the end. Here is a bit of nuance in terms of helping you decide whether you want to change class. If you're up against Cavalry without Black Grill, without any MP damage up effects, it's better to transform. But if you do, it's better to not transform. But if you're up against Berserkers, extra class, or Knight classes, it's always better to change your class to whatever the enemy is. In terms of Challenge Quest performance, Kazuradrop is a meta quick support. Now that might sound a little bit crazy, but hear me out. I said in terms of Challenge Quest support because, of course, in a farming scenario, if Kazuradrop herself isn't doing the farming, she doesn't have any batteries. So she would not naturally be chosen as one of your quick supports to help you loop. But in a Challenge Quest scenario for a quick servant, card damage and card effectiveness is very important. Since you are making so many stars, you of course want to utilize those stars as much as possible with as many of your DPS's cards as possible. So Kazuradrop, compared to the other two Scotties, of course, is lacking that 50 MP battery, but a lot of times you don't really need that much battery in a challenge quest because your main DPS might have a battery, and also if you're just doing triple Scotty and you're using your plug suit immediately for all of your steroids, then you would have one of your Scotties have their 50 battery hang. And because of quick DPS's tendency to refund with their face cards, you don't necessarily ever need that extra 50 MP battery. So outside of the battery, let's compare Kazuradrop's steroids with the two Scotties. So the two Scotties, of course, have their signature 50% quick ups, which is essentially the same as Kazuradrop's 50% quick down for 3 turns. Kazuradrop, instead of having either 100% Buster crit up or 100% quick crit up, has 50% crit resist down. And as we mentioned earlier when talking about this skill, this actually acts as a card down. This is one of the biggest reasons why she is so good, especially for like a quick single target DPS against the boss, because this resist down doesn't care what card type you are attacking the enemy with. And also, of course, this boosts the MP gain on both your DPS's quick and arts cards, assuming they crit, which, I mean, it shouldn't be too hard for a quick servant to consistently crit with their cards. And finally, remember when I briefly mentioned about the buff type brackets? Usually you are overloading on critical damage buffs. There are so many sources of critical damage buffs. You have the passive from Append 4, passives from class score, and of course, most supports have their critical damage boost numbers at very high. So you would actually probably prefer an extra 50% card effectiveness, especially if that card effectiveness applies to all of your cards as long as you crit. For example, if you're pairing Kazuradrop with your Summer Scotty, your Buster card now hits extremely hard because it's essentially a 50% Buster up and a 100% Buster crit up from the Summer Scotty. And this also, of course, allows your Arts crit to feel a lot better because neither of the two Scotties have the ability to boost your Arts cards. Even some of the quick servants have really good arts cards. They don't necessarily want to use them for gains because their quick card was just doing so much more damage. However, now with Kazuradrop, you can actually select your arts card and gain a massive amounts of MP. And add on the fact that Kazuradrop's third skill is a 50% defense down, it is the most offensive secondary steroid, as opposed to Summer Scotty's party-wide attack up and 15% quick buster up, or Standard Scotty's AoE 30% defense down. So once again, Kazuradrop is a quick support that especially focuses on debuffing one target because of that skill 3 effect, and also in general she just has less cooldowns than either of the two Scotties as well, since she has essentially all of her cooldowns at 5 turns, as long as you're not supporting another Sakura phase. So unfortunately for Melt specifically, Kazuradrop has the equal amount of cooldown as the two Scotties instead of having a 1 turn shorter cooldown. But still, you know, they pair very well. From my personal experience, when I'm using single target quick servants, I definitely prefer to swap out one of the Scotties for a Kazuradrop. Of course, which Scotty gets swapped out depends on your DPS, whether they have really strong buster cards or if they are mostly focusing on quick and arts cards. But yeah, Kazuradrop is an extremely powerful quick support that has already proven herself throughout the multiple min-turn runs that has come out since her release. If you do follow those more closely on Twitter or on YouTube, you will see most modern quick DPS runs do use Kazuradrop instead of two Scotties a lot of the time. Or of course, you can also use all 3 of them in quests that doesn't allow duplicates. Kazuradrop's MP can also serve as additional support, of course, because of its ability to soften up the enemies with the 20% attack down for 3 turns, as well as the 20% defense down for 3 turns, allowing you to do even more damage against the enemies. And finally, the MP also has a stun effect that is boosted up to a 70% chance when combined with her first skill, which does provide the traditionally frail quick team a little bit of extra crowd control. So if your favorite DPS is a quick servant, especially a quick single target, I highly recommend at least picking up 1 copy of Kazuradrop. She's gonna feel very much like Merlin or Proto Merlin, where they don't necessarily help you in farming, but in a challenge quest, they are like the second best unit outside of the 50 MP chargers that you can just immediately bring out into every single fight. Now, I'm not saying Kazuradrop doesn't have a couple of glaring weaknesses as a support. First and foremost, of course, if the boss has debuff immunity, Kazuradrop just completely falls apart as a support. And also, if your game plan involves killing off one of your supports, Kazuradrop is the one that cannot get killed off because her skill 1 debuff requires her to stay on the field in order for them to apply over and over again in the span of 3 turns. So yeah, there's definitely a couple of things to look out for. This is also why I personally don't recommend bringing 2 Kazuradrops as your quick support. I think Kazuradrop is like a great secondary when paired with either of the Scotties. As a DPS, Kazuradrop is also just extremely competent. First and foremost, of course, she benefits all the same from all of her very powerful supportive effects. She doesn't even have to decide whether if you want to put the buffs on her or on your other DPS, because all of her supportive effects are debuffs, so your entire party can benefit from it regardless of who you target. Kazuradrop, of course, also has the class change gimmick, which allows her to essentially be uncounterable by 99% of the enemies in the game. As of now, the only known servant that can counter her in terms of using the class triangle is Space Ereshkigal, because Kazuradrop cannot change herself into a beast class, and Space Ereshkigal's beast class in particular counters extra class, which includes alter ego. However, in every other scenario, Kazuradrop would at the very least be neutral, as well as do 75% extra damage because of her passive. Now, the class change does have a duration, it only lasts for 3 turns, and unlike in a farming scenario where you only take 3 turns for the fight, in a challenge quest scenario you will run out of the class change. However, assuming you don't have another Sakura series servant on the field, it only has a 2-turn downtime, so I still think it's completely fine to use Kazuradrop against a Night class boss, for example, simply because alter egos also just take neutral damage against Night classes, so it's not like she becomes super susceptible to them for that 2-turn downtime. Kazuradrop, of course, also has a great skill 3 because of that massive 5000 heal and full self debuff cleanse, which is really useful against certain bosses. And if you use her as a main DPS, she can spam her MP a lot more often, and her MP's debuff effect really racks up if you are using her MP every single turn. It can once again, go up to 60% attack down, which cuts the enemy's attack to less than half, and 60% defense down, which combined with her skill 3 actually just reaches the cap of defense down. Actually goes over by 10%, so it's a little bit of a waste, but still really powerful MP effect if you can spam it enough. And also she can just kind of stun lock the enemy if you're lucky enough. I wouldn't completely bet on it, but 70% chance on a spammable MP is still extremely powerful. Kazuradrop, of course, has great card gains to help her spam her MP because of that skill 1, and overall, all of her skills allows her card damage to be really strong. So even though she's an AoE servant, she does really good single target damage, surprisingly. So overall, I think Kazuradrop is a wonderful DPS, no matter if you use her as a main DPS or as a sub DPS. Just crazy valuable servant to keep on the field. Kazuradrop, because of all of her great survival effects, can also be a pretty decent solo unit. The massive heal combined with the short cooldown allows her to have very good sustain, and of course the class change can allow her to do a lot of interesting plays, especially if you are soloing a quest with a lot of different enemies with mixed classes. So for example, when I did my prison tower run, I was able to steal Jean's ruler class so that Kazuradrop can take less damage for the following 2 turns. Now this is obviously a very rare scenario, but even if we don't really consider the class change, she's just a great solo unit. A spammable 70% stun MP that can cripple the enemy as well. Also, helps a lot with that solo. So everything that is great about her DPS sort of extends to what helps her be a great solo unit. And once again, I'm not saying she's like a crazily top tier solo unit like Alice, for example, but if you do want to use her to solo a boss once in a while for fun, she's definitely extremely competent. In conclusion, Kazuradrop is an S tier servant, one of the best servants released in the entire year, undoubtedly. There's definitely an argument to say that she is the strongest servant released the entire year, but that very much depends on your roster and what card type do you really enjoy using. As a farmer, Kazuradrop is essentially in a better farming system than the traditional quick looping system, because with double Kazuradrop, she cannot care about any enemy count or refund at all, as well as run CEs that doesn't have any starting charge. You can almost see her as a buster looper while she is in the double Kazuradrop system. And the cheapest version of the double Kazuradrop system is also just Kazuradrop plus Atlas Mystic Code plus Geronimo and another support Kazuradrop. So it's very cheap for newer players. Another great thing about Kazuradrop for new players is essentially she is a better berserker because of her class change gimmick. It's basically impossible to resist her with a class advantage effect. As a challenge quest support, Kazuradrop is able to provide so many buffs that it is on par or sometimes even better than Scotty if we only look at their skill set and not their MPs. Kazuradrop also has a shorter cooldown than both of the Scotties as well. But of course, using Kazuradrop as a DPS in a challenge quest allows her to reap all of the benefits that she's able to provide another DPS for herself, and Kazuradrop's only weakness is of course debuff immune enemies, and debuff resistance can also rarely stop her since she has a debuff success rate up on her skill 1. So unless the enemy's debuff immune, I think Kazuradrop is able to handle them one way or another. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Once again, TLDR, like the final TLDR for people, I highly recommend rolling Kazuradrop are new players, and of course players that want to run the double Kazuradrop system, and also of course people that very much enjoy single target quick boss killing DPSs such as Okita or Skahak. I think if you are one of these three kinds of people, I highly recommend at the very least picking up one copy of Kazuradrop. You might have to go for higher MP levels if you're wanting to use her as the main DPS for farming and such. But yeah, at the very least, as a quick support, I think she is one that is definitely worth picking up. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I apologize for the delay. I'll see you guys in the next one.